The story begins with a tense uprising on the planet Theian, where power is being contested within the royal family. Kalira, the heir to the throne, is deprived of her right by her brutal cousin, Ravik, and is cast out of the palace. But Kalira refuses to accept this fate. She decides to lead a revolution, fighting not only to reclaim the throne but also to free the people of Theian from Ravik's oppressive rule. Nexus 7, located on the outskirts of known space, had long since ceased to be a place of exploration or wonder. It was a cold, metal behemoth, orbiting an unremarkable planet far from any significant trade routes. The hum of machinery and the click of airlocks had replaced the excitement of discovery. The station's corridors were narrow, dark, and industrial, lit by harsh, flickering overhead lights that seemed to mock any sense of warmth or life. It was a place where life was measured in function and routine rather than excitement or curiosity. The long, narrow maintenance passage Asher walked through was as grim as the rest of the station, a steel tunnel crisscrossed with exposed piping and conduits that hummed with barely contained energy. The air was thick, a mix of recycled oxygen and the faint scent of oil and machinery, tinged with a metallic undertone. Every step Asher took echoed loudly, breaking the unnatural stillness of the corridor. His boots clicked against the cold, industrial floor, reverberating down the darkened passage. The lights above buzzed intermittently, casting eerie shadows that seemed to shift and stretch, like something alive, waiting in the dark. Despite the steady rhythm of his footsteps, there was an unsettling silence, a palpable weight that made Asher's skin crawl. The only sound, other than the hum of the machinery, was the ragged breathing of the creature in his arms. In Asher's arms lay the injured alien, a creature unlike any he had encountered in his 7 years as the station's lone veterinarian. Its fur was unlike anything found in terrestrial biology, a stunning white, striped pattern that was matted with blood. The color contrast was stark, almost unnatural, but beautiful in its own right. The stripes seemed to shimmer as the light from the overhead panels caught them in fleeting moments, hinting at an otherworldly elegance. The creature's body was slim but muscular, its sleek form giving it an air of both grace and danger. Despite its beauty, the creature's state of injury was tragic. Blood, dark and thick, oozed from its wounds, staining its fur and soaking into Asher's own sleeve. The fur clung to the wounded body, evidence of a desperate struggle, a fight for survival against something far more ruthless than the creature itself. Its breathing was shallow, labored, a soft, tortured whisper against Asher's chest, each exhalation a fragile attempt at life. Its eyes, large and alien, flickered with a mix of fear and defiance, the amber color of the iris gleaming with an intelligence that hinted at a consciousness far beyond that of any animal. Its pupils, slitted like a cat's, widened and contracted, adjusting to the dim light as Asher carried it through the station. The most unsettling feature, however, were its claws, sharp, gleaming black talons that flexed weakly against his arm, digging into his skin as if the creature could feel the weight of its own fate. The sudden, sharp pressure sent a jolt of pain up Asher's forearm, but he did not flinch. Instead, he whispered to the creature, trying to calm it. "Hold on," Asher muttered softly, his voice barely a whisper, the words more of a reassurance to himself than the creature. He wasn't sure why he had said it. Perhaps it was because the creature's presence, fragile as it was, felt like a connection, something beyond just the mere act of saving a life. He had seen countless injured beings in his career, but this one was different. There was something in its gaze, something that tugged at him deeper than simple sympathy for a suffering animal. Asher's brow furrowed as he looked down at the creature, noting the way its eyes locked onto him. It wasn't just a survival instinct. The look it gave him was intelligent, calculated, even. It wasn't an animal in the purest sense of the word. Something else was at play here, something far more complex. The creature's claws dug deeper into his skin, as if acknowledging his words, or perhaps understanding the urgency of the situation. It seemed to respond to his voice, not like an animal reacting to a tone, but like something more sentient, more aware. The pain was sharp, but Asher could feel the connection between them growing, undeniable in its intensity. After what felt like an eternity, Asher reached his clinic, his heart pounding in his chest with both the effort of carrying the creature and the growing sense of unease. His hands were slick with blood, both his own and the creature's, and his mind raced, trying to piece together any clue about what had happened. The station was isolated, there was no reason for anything like this to occur here. Yet, here it was, an injured, alien being, and something in the back of his mind told him that this was no ordinary animal. As he entered the clinic, the door hissed open. His automated assistant immediately responded with an indifferent chirp. "Dr. Hayes, you're bleeding again." The assistant's voice was flat, mechanical, entirely unaware of the gravity of the situation. "I'll survive. Let's get you fixed up first," Asher muttered, his voice tinged with irritation, though the words lacked their usual confidence. His focus was entirely on the creature in his arms now, the urgency of its condition driving everything else to the back of his mind. He gently laid the creature down on the cold metal examination table. The creature's breathing, still shallow, was accompanied by the occasional, involuntary hiss, as if in protest of its helpless state. Asher quickly stepped to his station, activating the medical console to begin the scan. His fingers were already shaking, the first signs of exhaustion from the journey mixing with the adrenaline of the moment. The clinic was sterile, lined with diagnostic equipment and shelves filled with medical supplies from countless species. The walls were cold and bare, lit by the sterile glow of the overhead lights. The machines hummed quietly as Asher worked quickly, applying pressure to the worst of the creature's wounds while the system began its scan. The overhead diagnostic scanner whirred to life, casting a soft blue light across the creature's body. The machine's hum was a soothing contrast to the raw intensity of the moment. As the scanner processed the creature's vitals, Asher stepped back, carefully assessing the situation. His mind was already racing ahead, piecing together fragments of information he had never had to consider before. The scan finished with a soft beep, and the results flashed up on the screen. Asher studied the holographic display, his eyes narrowing in disbelief. "Unknown species," the system announced, almost as if the words themselves were trying to make sense of what had been presented to it. Asher's hand hovered over the controls, disbelief settling in. "Philetus sapiens," the system declared, a match with a 78% confidence level. The name meant nothing to him, nothing he had encountered in his years of study, nothing that appeared in any of the station's databases. Philetus sapiens, but this wasn't an intelligent species. It was an animal, and yet, the scan suggested otherwise. Asher leaned closer to the screen, his mind trying to process the impossible. Philetus sapiens were sentient humanoids, he thought, shaking his head. The aristocratic species from the Sinus Quadrant were powerful, secretive, and political, a far cry from the creature now lying before him. This was no humanoid, this was a beast, a strange, wounded animal with intelligence that defied logic. As the creature began to stir again, its eyes opening wide, Asher froze. There was a sharpness in those eyes, a clarity that sent a chill down his spine. The creature hissed softly, a noise full of warning, revealing its sharp, needle-like fangs. Its claws twitched, as though preparing for a sudden strike. Despite its injuries, the creature's presence was undeniable. It wasn't just an animal. Asher could feel it in the air. There was something about it, something that drew him in, that made him feel connected to it in a way he couldn't explain. What have I found? The question reverberated in his mind as he continued to work, his hands moving with precision. This was no ordinary injury, no simple veterinary case. The stakes were higher than anything he had faced before. This scene sets the tone for the unfolding mystery. Asher is not merely treating an injured animal, but he has unknowingly entered the realm of something far more significant. The connection between him and the creature, NYX, and the strange sense of intelligence that the creature exudes, will drive the narrative forward, propelling both Asher and the audience into a world filled with untold secrets and interstellar politics. This approach brings the story to life, grounding the mystery and tension in vivid details and emotional depth, ensuring that the audience feels the rising suspense with every step Asher takes. Asher's clinic, a stark, sterile environment on the cold industrial station, Nexus 7. The lights flicker overhead, casting faint shadows that stretch across the room. The walls are lined with advanced medical equipment that hums quietly, each machine waiting for a signal to be used. It is a place designed for function, not comfort. Its very existence a reminder of the harsh reality of life in space. The room smells faintly of antiseptic, but there is also a metallic tang in the air, a product of the station's aging life support systems. The sterile equipment sits on the countertops, neatly arranged, its sharp angles and sleek design made for efficiency. The examination table, where the creature lies, is cold and unyielding, its surface a glossy silver that reflects the dim overhead lighting. Nearby, an array of diagnostic tools waits, ready to scan and probe the unknown, but even these seem to pale in comparison to the situation unfolding before Asher's tired eyes. The overhead lights cast a harsh glow on the creature's fragile form, adding an almost clinical severity to its suffering. The fluorescent hum above mingles with the quiet beeping of the medical consoles, the constant reminders of both the urgency and the strange peace in this sterile environment. Asher stands over the alien creature, studying its injuries, both with professional detachment and a deepening sense of unease. The creature's fur, though still matted with blood, retains an almost ethereal quality. The white stripes against the silvery gray base shimmer under the medical lights, even in its current state of pain. Its limbs, long and lean, are covered in patches of torn fur, revealing patches of pale skin beneath skin that pulses with a faint, almost imperceptible light, suggesting that this being might be far beyond anything Asher has ever encountered. The wounds that mar its body are deep, some cauterized, while others bleed slowly, refusing to heal. There are burn marks near its ribs, likely from some form of energy weapon, and the way the edges of the wounds are singed tells Asher that the attack wasn't random. The force behind the injury was deliberate, precise. Someone had meant to cause this creature slow, agonizing pain. Despite its battered appearance, there's an undeniable beauty in its structure. Its body is built with an alien grace, its musculature rippling beneath its fur in ways that defy earthly biology. The creature's head, though feline in some respects, is more elongated, its ears tapering to sharp points, and the face, while sleek, holds an unsettling intelligence in its amber eyes. Asher carefully places the medical scanner over the creature's chest, the machine's cool light bathing it in an eerie blue glow. The scanner whirs to life with a soft hum, emitting a delicate pulse as it sweeps over the creature's body. The hum of the machine seems to blend with the creature's shallow breathing, creating a strange rhythm between them, as if both creature and machine are in sync with some unseen force. As the data begins to populate on the screen, Asher leans in closer, eyes narrowing as he scans the results. The creature's vital signs are weak but stable, though still dangerously low. Its pulse, though faint, still beats with life. However, what catches Asher's attention more than anything is the species identification. The system flashes the words, "Unknown species detected." Asher frowns, staring at the screen in disbelief. Philetus sapiens. The words seemed to burn into his brain. He had never heard of such a species. The database had no record of anything like this creature. Asher's fingers hover over the keyboard, replaying the scan's results. The name Philetus sapiens sounds almost familiar in an abstract way, as if it belongs to something he's read about but never encountered. The system lists the creature's closest match as Philetus sapiens, with a 92% confidence rating. The name comes up again, this time with a subheading, Sentient, Humanoid Species from the Sinus Quadrant. Aristocratic. Secretive. Asher's thoughts scramble. Philetus sapiens were an advanced species, known for their intelligence and power, and their ability to manipulate political structures from the shadows. They were not known for being animals. They were humanoids, with complex social systems and technologies far more advanced than anything he had ever studied. But this creature, this was no humanoid. This was something entirely different. Asher blinks, processing the implications of what he's reading. How could this be? How could an aristocratic species be reduced to this? Asher's train of thought is shattered as the creature's eyes snap open, and for the briefest moment, everything around him seems to freeze. The amber eyes lock onto his, and a cold shiver runs up his spine. The depth of the gaze is unlike anything he's ever experienced. It's not just the eyes of an animal or even a sentient being, they are the eyes of something far older, far more knowing. Asher blinks, taken aback by the intensity of the gaze. The creature's pupils, slit like a cat's, widen and contract rapidly as it adjusts to the light in the room. But there is more in those eyes. There is understanding, an awareness that sends a chill down Asher's spine. He feels the weight of its gaze, almost as if the creature is assessing him, weighing him, and finding him lacking. He steps back for a moment, his breath caught in his throat. What is this? Then, just as quickly as the connection was made, the creature's eyes soften, and in the silence that stretches between them, something shifts. A sensation, a jolt of emotion passes between them. It's not something Asher can describe with words. It's a feeling more than anything else, a deep, resonant connection that vibrates through his very bones. And then, in his mind, a voice echoes telepathically. The words are not spoken, but felt. The sensation is almost like an electric shock, yet it's soothing, comforting. Asher can't explain how, but he knows the creature is speaking to him, directly, inside his mind. I trust you, healer. The words are clear, though faint, and the emotion behind them is unmistakable, desperation, but also a deep, overwhelming sense of trust. Asher stands frozen, the creature's gaze never leaving his face. His heart pounds in his chest, his hands trembling as he looks down at the creature, the weight of the moment pressing heavily on him. What have I gotten myself into? He swallows hard, trying to steady his breath, but the connection lingers. It is as if a part of him, something deeper, something ancient, has just been unlocked. He doesn't fully understand what it means, or how it is even possible, but there is no denying the bond that has been formed in that brief moment. I won't hurt you. The words slip out of Asher's mouth before he can stop them, a promise more to himself than to the creature. His voice is barely a whisper, but he knows the creature understands. He continues his work, moving mechanically as the adrenaline and confusion still course through his body. He pulls a regenerative gel pack from the supply cabinet and applies it to the creature's deepest wounds. The gel's biotechnological properties begin to repair the cellular damage, knitting the flesh together with astonishing speed. The creature flinches slightly as the gel settles into the wounds, but it remains still, its amber eyes never leaving Asher's face. The connection between them is undeniable. In the stillness of the clinic, with only the hum of the machinery around them, Asher knows that whatever this creature is, it is not just any animal. It is something far more, something connected to a larger, darker mystery that he may never fully understand. But for now, he has to focus on keeping it alive. As Asher works, his mind races, trying to process everything he's learned in the past few minutes. The skin results are still fresh in his mind, as is the strange telepathic communication he's just experienced. He glances over at the creature, watching it closely. There is something about it, something that resonates within him in a way he can't explain. Whatever this being is, it's not just an ordinary alien. It's something far more complex, more intelligent, and more dangerous than anything Asher has ever encountered. And now, with the strange bond they've formed, he's no longer just a passive observer in this mystery, he's involved in it, whether he likes it or not. The creature's breathing steadies, and for the first time since he found it, Asher feels a sliver of hope. He doesn't know what's going to happen next, but he knows one thing for certain: this is only the beginning of something much, much bigger. The reception hall of Nexus 7 Station, a space that once may have been a functional and sterile room, now exudes an eerie tension. Cold, metal walls stretch to meet high ceilings, with a few flickering overhead lights casting long, unsteady shadows. The air is still, carrying the faint hum of the station's ancient life support systems that hum like a distant heartbeat. It is a place built for utility, not ceremony, but today it feels as if the very atmosphere is heavy with an unspoken, looming significance. The floor is a dull gray, scuffed from years of use, and the central area is sparsely furnished with a few chairs and desks hastily arranged for the occasion. A long metallic table sits at the far end, surrounded by holographic displays that pulse in and out with light, showing encrypted messages and mission data. It is a place designed for bureaucratic processes, not grand events. Yet, today, it has transformed into the backdrop for a diplomatic arrival that will change everything. The voice of Commander Taro echoes through the station's intercom system, slicing through the heavy silence of the station's lower levels. His voice, typically a calm authority, now carries an edge of urgency, reverberating down the narrow hallways and reaching every corner of Nexus 7. Attention all personnel. Commander Taro speaking. We are honored to announce that the diplomatic vessel, Crimson Claw, has requested emergency docking privileges. All security protocols will be elevated to level 2 until further notice. All non-essential personnel are to remain in designated areas. I repeat, all non-essential personnel remain in designated areas. Asher stands motionless, his heart suddenly racing in his chest. His mind reels as he processes the announcement. The Crimson Claw? The name carries an ominous weight. The station was remote, insignificant in the grand scheme of galactic politics. For a diplomatic vessel to request emergency docking, it could mean one of two things: a diplomatic crisis or a far more dangerous, personal mission. But it is the second possibility that grips Asher's mind, the Baroness. His thoughts quickly turn to the creature NYX. The bond he feels with it deepens by the minute, and the sudden arrival of this high-ranking diplomatic ship is no coincidence. The weight of the moment presses heavily on him. The doors to the reception hall groan as they slide open, revealing the Baroness Kalira in a stark contrast to the dim and utilitarian surroundings. As the doors part, a soft, almost ethereal light seems to follow her. She is a figure of commanding presence, regal yet otherworldly, her feline features a striking combination of beauty and power. Kalira's long, silvery hair cascades over her shoulders, framed by the high collar of her crimson diplomatic uniform. The uniform fits her with an elegance that borders on otherworldly, its deep crimson hue contrasting sharply with the pale fur that extends down her neck and arms. Her posture is perfect, standing with a grace that seems almost unnatural, every movement calculated and deliberate. But it is her eyes, those amber eyes, sharp and intense, that capture Asher's attention. They lock onto him with a knowing gaze, as though they see into the deepest recesses of his soul. Her pupils, slitted like a predator's, seem to shimmer in the light, and Asher is left momentarily breathless, feeling as though she can see every truth he's tried to bury deep within himself. Kalira's presence commands the room, as though she bends the very air around her. The tension that had filled the hall moments before evaporates as she steps forward, her eyes never leaving Asher's. Asher feels the weight of her gaze, and a chill runs down his spine. His body tenses instinctively, though he forces himself to remain composed. His breath catches in his throat as he tries to speak, but the words stick for a moment, unsure of how to respond to the sheer presence of this being. Kalira's lips curve into a slight smile, not of amusement, but of understanding. It's as though she knows the questions, the fear, the confusion swirling in Asher's mind. She steps forward, the air around her seeming to hum with an unspoken energy, and her voice, though soft, carries a power that fills the room. "Dr. Hayes," she says, her voice carrying an exotic, melodic cadence, "I sense NYX's presence. You've found him, haven't you?" Her words fall into the silence between them like a stone dropped into deep water. Asher's heart skips a beat, and for a moment, his breath is caught in his chest. He doesn't know how she knows, but somehow, he senses that she isn't asking for confirmation. She already knows the answer. His voice shakes slightly as he responds, I've treated him. He's safe for now, but..." Asher falters, unsure of how to continue. His mind races, trying to piece together the strange connection between NYX and Kalira, the mysterious bond that seems to exist between them. He glances at her, searching for answers in those piercing amber eyes. Kalira's smile falters just slightly, her expression becoming more serious. She steps closer, her movements fluid, almost like a predator circling its prey. The temperature in the room seems to drop as she speaks, her words carrying a weight that presses down on Asher's chest. "You don't understand," Kalira says softly, her voice laced with a hint of sadness. "NYX is more than just a companion. He is my heart." Asher feels the full weight of her words crash into him, and a deep, instinctive pull rises within him. There is something ancient in her voice, something that transcends the simple relationship between a pet and its owner. NYX is not just an animal to her, he is a part of her, a bond so strong that it seems to tether their very souls together. The words hang in the air, thick with unspoken meaning, and for the first time, Asher realizes that he is standing on the edge of something far more complicated than simple animal care. There are political and emotional stakes at play, forces far beyond his understanding. Kalira steps even closer to Asher, her eyes never leaving his. The silence between them stretches, pregnant with a tension that Asher can almost feel in the air. There is something in her gaze that pulls him in, something that draws him closer to her truth. He feels as though she is opening a window into her soul, showing him something raw and vulnerable, something she has likely never shown anyone before. In the silence, a subtle, invisible force seems to pass between them, an energy that is too strong to ignore, too profound to dismiss. Asher feels it, this unspoken bond, and for a moment, He isn't sure if it's coming from Kalira, from NYX, or from some unknown source entirely. This is not just a creature, he thinks. This is something far more important. This is a key to something far bigger than any of us. His heart beats faster, and yet, there is a calmness in him too, a sense of purpose. His thoughts swirl with the growing realization that his life has just taken an irreversible turn. He is no longer simply a veterinarian on a remote space station. He is now part of something much greater. Kalira stands before him, her eyes intense, her expression unreadable. Her voice, when she speaks again, is softer, almost a whisper, as if sharing a secret with him that no one else is meant to hear. NYX has been with me since the beginning, she says, her voice filled with quiet strength. His bond with me goes beyond what you can comprehend. He is my protector, my guide, my equal. Without him, I would not be whole. We are connected in ways you cannot understand, Dr. Hayes. And now, I need your help to protect him, and to protect the future of my people. The weight of her words lingers in the air, and Asher feels a profound sense of responsibility settling in his chest. The gravity of the situation is heavier than he could have imagined. The creature he thought was simply an injured animal is now revealed to be something far more significant, a living symbol of power, trust, and vulnerability. Asher feels a strange kinship with Kalira at that moment, despite the vast gulf that exists between their lives. Their paths have crossed by fate, but perhaps, Asher muses, there is more to this than mere coincidence. The Baroness is not just a ruler, she is a being whose heart is bound to something far greater, and Asher has become entangled in that story. The clinic, usually a place of sterile order, was now a site of quiet tension and uncertainty. A hidden room in the back, concealed behind a sliding panel and shielded by the hum of machinery, was the only place Asher could trust. It was an unremarkable space, small, narrow, and filled with basic medical equipment, its stark walls lined with old storage cabinets and unused diagnostic devices. The air was thick with the scent of antiseptic, mingled with the faint smell of metal and dust that had accumulated from years of disuse. The lights in the hidden room flickered, casting long shadows across the steel walls. The space was silent except for the occasional clink of tools as Asher moved, trying to make sense of the weight of what he was now involved in. NYX lay in a large, simple recovery chamber at the far end of the room, hidden from prying eyes. The creature's body, now mostly free of the worst injuries, still bore signs of its struggle. Its fur matted, its breathing shallow and slow, though stable. A quiet beep from the diagnostic equipment across the room reminded Asher of the work still ahead, but it was the weight of the situation that truly preoccupied him. The secret of what NYX truly was, what it meant for Kalira, for the universe, gnawed at him, pulling his thoughts in 1,000 directions. The clinical nature of his work couldn't overshadow the deeper, unknowable layers of this discovery. Asher was alone in the room, save for NYX, but the presence of the creature was never far from his mind. There was something unspoken between them now, something stronger than the bond between a healer and a patient. The room itself was a patchwork of technology and disused space. It was a place designed for emergencies, a small, utilitarian corner of the station that had long been forgotten in the larger, bustling operations of Nexus 7. In this hidden space, Asher had made temporary repairs to some of the station's old machinery, hoping to keep the secret of NYX safe. But the secrecy was growing harder to maintain. There was a constant unease that clung to the room, an oppressive stillness that made every breath feel like an intrusion. The walls, once pristine, now bore the marks of Asher's efforts, rushed repairs, tools strewn carelessly across counters, and the constant flicker of outdated lights. It was a place meant to remain in the shadows, away from the rest of the station. In the corner, a small air filtration system buzzed quietly, its hum barely loud enough to fill the silence. NYX lay on a padded surface in the center of the room, its long, sleek body curled into a somewhat protective position. The creature's fur was beginning to regain its luster, though its pale stripes were still faintly stained with blood. Its breathing was slow and steady now, the worst of its injuries healed by the regenerative gel Asher had applied earlier. Yet, there was still a weariness to its posture, a tension in its muscles that only now Asher noticed. Even in sleep, NYX was aware of the danger, of the people who were searching for it. Its eyes, closed for now, still held a strange intensity. Asher knew that NYX wasn't just a passive patient. It had something beyond animal instinct, something deeper, more aware. Asher could feel it in his own bones, in the way the creature's presence seemed to fill the room. The bond between them had been forged so quickly, so unexpectedly, that he was still struggling to fully understand it. The creature's strange ability to communicate telepathically had opened a new door in Asher's mind, a door to the unknown. The mere thought of being able to hear its thoughts, to connect with it on a level that transcended words, both fascinated and terrified him. The intensity of their connection was still unsettling, but Asher couldn't deny that it was real. The soft chirp from NYX startled Asher. He froze for a moment, his body tensing as he looked toward the creature. NYX's amber eyes flickered open, a faint glow illuminating the dark room. There was no sound of movement, no immediate shift in its posture, but the telepathic message that followed was undeniable. "You must hide me from them." The words were soft but clear, felt more than heard, reverberating inside Asher's mind like a whisper that traveled directly into his consciousness. There was no mistaking the urgency in the message, the fear that laced its tone. Asher's heart tightened in his chest. He wasn't sure how much longer they could keep NYX hidden. There were already signs that the station's personnel were growing suspicious. The diplomatic mission aboard the Crimson Claw had raised alarms, and he knew the Baroness's arrival was not a coincidence. NYX's injuries, Kalira's concern, everything seemed to be converging into a storm that Asher wasn't prepared to weather. Asher's voice was a whisper, his words nearly drowned out by the weight of the moment. I know. They'll be back soon. I'm keeping you safe." He couldn't explain it, but the words felt like a promise, and the strange bond between them, NYX and himself, seemed to solidify with each passing moment. It wasn't just about the creature anymore. It was about them, together, caught in something that was both unknowable and inescapable. Asher paced the room, his mind racing. He had always thought of himself as a practical person, someone who dealt in tangible problems and solutions. But NYX, this creature, was something beyond anything he had ever encountered. This was no ordinary animal or patient. The creature was more a key to something larger than himself. As Asher continued his movements in the cramped space, his thoughts seemed to stretch outward, drawn toward the invisible threads that connected him to NYX. He could almost feel the creature's presence, not just with his senses, but with a deeper awareness, something that tugged at his very core. It was as though the creature's thoughts were intertwined with his own, and the bond between them was growing stronger with every passing second. His hands, once steady in their movements, now trembled slightly. It wasn't the fear of being discovered, not entirely. It was something else, something far more profound. It was the weight of responsibility, the weight of knowing that his life, his actions, and his very future were now tied to something far greater than himself. NYX wasn't just an alien. It was a being of unimaginable importance, and Asher's role in this strange unfolding drama was far from clear. The connection between them, though still unspoken, was undeniable. Asher had always been alone in his work, isolated by choice, by necessity, but now he was tethered to something larger, something beyond him. The quiet, unvoiced understanding between him and NYX felt like an ancient link, one that had been waiting for a time such as this. And now, that time had come. Asher paused for a moment, his hand resting on the wall as his thoughts swirled. He had treated countless beings in his career, but none had ever made him feel this way, none had ever made him question his place in the universe so deeply. The very fabric of his existence had shifted since NYX had appeared. He wasn't just a doctor anymore. He was part of something bigger, something far more mysterious and dangerous than he could have ever imagined. The sound of approaching footsteps outside the room snapped Asher back to the present. His pulse quickened, and he moved instinctively toward the hidden door, his heart thumping loudly in his chest. He could hear voices in the hall, the faint murmurs of conversation, and he knew that time was running out. NYX couldn't stay hidden forever. Someone would come looking for it soon. Someone would begin asking questions that Asher didn't have answers to. Asher glanced toward the recovery chamber where NYX lay. The creature's eyes were now closed again, but its breathing, though steady, remained shallow. There was a sense of stillness in the air, a moment of quiet before the storm. The bond between them, still unspoken, felt like an anchor, holding them both together in the face of an unknown future. He knew that whatever happened next, he couldn't undo the connection he had made with NYX. It was too deep, too real, to be erased. They were bound now, intertwined in a way that defied reason. The trust NYX had placed in him, the unspoken plea for protection, was something Asher couldn't ignore. It wasn't just a matter of keeping NYX safe. It was a matter of ensuring that he could navigate the dangers ahead, both for himself and for the creature he had come to protect. As the footsteps grew louder, Asher knew he had to act quickly. There was no more time to waste. The storm was coming, and whether he was ready or not, he had to face it. The bond between him and NYX was unbreakable, and together, they would face whatever came next, whether they wanted to or not. The air inside the hidden room was thick with a quiet tension, heavy with secrets that had been buried far too long. The sterile, dimly lit space felt almost suffocating, its walls whispering stories of things that should never have been uncovered. The low hum of machinery in the background, the flickering overhead light that barely illuminated the shadows, it was as if the room itself was holding its breath, awaiting something inevitable. Asher worked at his station, his hands moving with practiced precision as he continued to stabilize NYX. The creature's body was still weak, its fur still streaked with the blood from the battle it had barely survived. Its breathing, though steadier now, remained shallow, and its large amber eyes flickered open, fixing on Asher. NYX's gaze was calm, but in its depths, there was an undeniable intelligence, a silent plea for safety, for understanding. On the small metal stool beside him sat Baroness Kalira, her posture regal despite the circumstances. Her elegant figure contrasted sharply with the cold utilitarian surroundings, as if she were a visitor from another world. Kalira's pale fur, which shimmered with a subtle luminescence in the dim light, rippled as she leaned forward. Her hands, long and graceful, were placed gently on NYX's head, her fingers stroking the creature's fur in slow, tender motions. The room felt smaller with her presence, less like a place for medical care and more like a space for intimacy, for unspoken understanding. Kalira's movements, so careful and slow, were a reflection of her deeper connection to the creature. Asher, despite the professional distance he usually maintained with his patients, couldn't help but notice the vulnerability that she allowed herself to show in front of him. The Baroness's gaze was fixed on NYX, but it was clear that her attention wasn't just on the creature's condition. It was on something deeper, something that connected them on a level Asher wasn't yet able to comprehend. She was more than a ruler, more than a diplomat. She was entwined with NYX in ways that were beyond the understanding of most sentient beings. Her fingers, gentle as they were, seemed to pulse with an almost imperceptible energy, as though they were linked to the creature by an invisible thread that Asher couldn't see, but could feel. It was a connection that transcended space, time, and species. Kalira's voice was soft, carrying an undeniable weight, one that made the air seem thicker, as if the room itself held its breath. He is an extension of me. He shares my blood, my thoughts. If he is harmed, I feel it. Her words landed like a delicate shockwave. Asher felt the truth of them in his chest, a sudden understanding dawning in him. It wasn't just that NYX was important to her. NYX was a part of her, as vital to her being as her own heartbeat, as essential as her own mind. The realization struck him with unexpected force. Kalira wasn't just NYX's protector, she was bound to it in a way that transcended the ordinary bond between a ruler and her companion. They were intertwined in a mystical, almost inexplicable manner. Asher glanced at Kalira, his eyes catching the quiet intensity of her expression. Her ember eyes, those same eyes that seemed to gleam with otherworldly intelligence, flickered with something deeper now. He could see it in her, an almost imperceptible shift, a weight in her gaze that spoke of centuries of pain and connection. This bond, between the Baroness and NYX, was not just one of companionship or loyalty, it was a shared existence. A connection that made them one in ways that could never be fully understood by another. Kalira leaned in slightly, her body moving with an elegance that still betrayed a hidden fragility. She was close now, close enough that Asher could feel the warmth of her presence, the weight of her quiet intensity. Her hand remained on NYX's head, but it was clear that her attention was no longer solely focused on the creature. "You've helped me," Kalira continued, her voice barely above a whisper, but with a power that seemed to reverberate through the air. "And in doing so, you've become part of my world, Dr. Hayes." Her words, though soft, struck Asher with unexpected force. He could hear the subtle tremor beneath her tone, the vulnerability that she allowed herself to show in that single sentence. Kalira, who was always poised, always controlled, was allowing herself to be seen in a way that was raw, human, even alien. Asher's breath caught in his throat. He had always kept his distance, maintaining professional barriers with his patients, but Kalira was different. The way she spoke, the way she was connecting with him, it was like the room had shifted, like the entire world had shifted. For a moment, he wasn't just a veterinarian working on an injured creature. He wasn't just a bystander in a political drama far beyond his comprehension. He was something else entirely, something personal, something caught in the pull of an ancient bond, a deep connection that was now forcing him to confront his place in it. Asher's hands stilled for a moment, hovering over NYX's body as he considered Kalira's words. He hadn't expected this. He had expected to treat the creature, to heal it, and to move on with his life, untouched by the greater politics of the station. But now, everything had changed. He was no longer just a healer. He was part of something far bigger, a piece in a puzzle that was beyond his understanding. Kalira's eyes flickered as she sensed the shift in him, a quiet acknowledgement passing between them. She knew that Asher was beginning to understand. She knew that, by helping her, he had unknowingly crossed a threshold, one that would bind him to her, to NYX, and to the fate that awaited them all. The weight of the moment lingered in the air. Asher could feel the gravity of the situation pressing down on him, but there was also something else, a subtle but undeniable feeling of connection. As he worked to stabilize NYX, he felt the creature's pulse, slow but steady, beneath his hands. He felt Kalira's presence beside him, her silent strength and unspoken resolve. For the first time in his life, Asher realized that he wasn't just healing a patient. He was protecting a world he didn't fully understand but was now irrevocably tied to. He could feel the pull of it, the weight of responsibility settling into his chest. The sense of duty that Kalira carried was now his, as well. Kalira, too, felt the bond that had been forged in this quiet moment. She had allowed herself to be vulnerable, to trust this human doctor, something that no one in her court had ever experienced. Asher's role in this was not just as a healer. He had become a part of her world, a world she had kept hidden from everyone for so long. And though she had given him a glimpse into her life, into her bond with NYX, Kalira knew that there were still layers of herself that she kept locked away. Yet, in this moment, in the quiet space between them, there was something else, something unspoken, something that bound them together. Asher's hands, steady once more, continued their work, but his mind raced with thoughts that he couldn't quite put into words. He had helped NYX. He had helped Kalira. But he was no longer just a passive observer in this world, he had become part of it. The connection between them had grown deeper than either of them could have expected. Whether Asher was ready for what lay ahead or not, he had crossed a threshold. And there would be no turning back. Kalira sat beside him, her presence as steady as ever, yet there was something else in her demeanor, a softness, a silent trust that had not been there before. She had spoken the truth to him, and in doing so, she had revealed more than just her bond with NYX. She had revealed a piece of herself, a piece that no one else had ever seen, and perhaps, one that no one ever would. Asher glanced at her once more, and this time, the look in her eyes was different. There was a depth there, something that seemed to acknowledge the shared moment they had experienced. Kalira wasn't just a ruler, she wasn't just a being of power, she was also a creature of raw emotion, of untold vulnerability. And in that vulnerability, she had allowed Asher to see the truth. For the first time, he understood that his involvement in this was far from accidental. He had become part of something larger, something more profound. NYX, Kalira, and the strange bond that connected them were now a part of his own story. And as much as he might try to deny it, Asher knew that he was no longer just a healer on a forgotten station. He was a key player in a mystery that spanned across the stars. The once sterile, peaceful environment of Asher's clinic was now transformed into a war zone. The soft hum of medical equipment and the low buzz of the station's life support systems had become an eerie backdrop to the chaos that unfolded. The walls of the clinic, cold and metallic, now felt like an impenetrable barrier, protecting the two lives within NYX and Kalira from the outside world. But that barrier was not enough to shield them from the impending danger. The clinic was a small, utilitarian space, clinical and functional, devoid of any unnecessary embellishments. The light above flickered, casting elongated shadows across the sterile white surfaces, and the air smelled faintly of antiseptic, a scent that now seemed to carry a darker weight. The room, once a safe haven for healing, now felt suffocating, a cage awaiting the inevitable storm. Asher moved with practiced ease, applying the final touches to the creature's recovery. NYX lay on the examination table, its fur, still matted with blood, showing the marks of a fierce battle. The creature's large amber eyes blinked slowly, the soft rise and fall of its chest betraying the pain it still carried. Despite its injuries, there was a glimmer of awareness in those eyes, a presence that belied its weakened state. The creature was far from helpless, and it was more than an animal. Asher had come to realize that NYX was not merely a patient. It was a living, breathing enigma, a being whose significance was far beyond what Asher had initially understood. Kalira sat near Nyx, her regal form still despite the tension in the room. Her presence was commanding, but there was an undercurrent of fear in her eyes. The Baroness, always composed and poised, now appeared vulnerable, her expression hardened by the burden of responsibility she carried, the weight of a secret she could no longer hide. They were not just on the run from political intrigue, they were being hunted. The walls were closing in. Suddenly, the tranquility of the clinic was shattered. The clinic's door exploded inward with a deafening roar, smoke and debris billowing into the sterile space. A shockwave reverberated through the room, throwing dust and fragments into the air, blurring Asher's vision for a brief moment. The force of the explosion sent a jolt of adrenaline through his body, his heart pounding as his survival instincts kicked in. Asher barely had time to react before the clinic was flooded with chaos. The air was thick with acrid smoke, and the faint, suffocating scent of burning metal mingled with the sterility of the room. The explosion had shattered the stillness of the clinic, and now, it felt as though all hell was breaking loose. Figures emerged from the smoke, shadowy silhouettes moving with precision and purpose. They were armed, their bodies clad in sleek, black armor, their movements smooth and practiced, like predators closing in on their prey. Nyx let out a ferocious snarl, its amber eyes flashing with defiance despite its weakened state. The creature, its claws still sharp, tried to rise from the examination table, its muscles straining against the injuries that riddled its body. It growled low, a sound that echoed in the room, a guttural warning to the intruders. Asher knew that Nyx was far from defenseless. It was a being of power and intelligence, but its injuries left it vulnerable. Still, the creature refused to back down. Asher's mind raced. He had only a split second to act, but his training kicked in. He moved quickly toward the nearest shelf, grabbing a sedative, a last resort in the face of this immediate threat. As he spun around, he hurled the vial at the first assassin, the glass shattering as the sedative sprayed into the air, hitting its target squarely in the face. The assassin's movements froze, their body slumping to the floor in a heap as the sedative took effect. But there was no time to savor the small victory. Asher's eyes darted toward Kalira, who was standing by Nyx's side. A second assassin, faster and more calculating than the first, was already aiming a sleek, energy-based weapon at her. The barrel of the weapon emitted a low, menacing hum, its intent clear. The assassin was targeting Kalira, intending to eliminate her, and the life they had just begun to rebuild. Without thinking, Asher lunged. His body acted on pure instinct, propelled by the need to protect Kalira from the threat that loomed before them. He was no soldier, no trained fighter, but the drive to shield her was too powerful to ignore. Asher's arms shot out, knocking Kalira to the side just as the energy beam fired. The beam hummed through the air, narrowly missing her, but the energy blast grazed her shoulder, sending her sprawling to the floor in a violent crash. Kalira's body crumpled with a soft cry, her armor taking some of the impact, but the damage was still evident. She lay on the cold metal floor for a moment, her hand clutching her shoulder, a grimace of pain crossing her face as the wound began to pulse with an unnatural heat. The assassin, seeing his target wounded, moved quickly to adjust his aim, preparing for a second strike. Asher's heart raced, but there was no time to think. He turned quickly, grabbing the closest instrument, a scalpel from the medical tray. He hurled it toward the assassin with all the precision and force he could muster. The blade flew through the air, striking the attacker's wrist and knocking the energy weapon from his hand. The assassin staggered back, briefly disoriented. "No!" Asher shouted, more out of instinct than thought. He could hear Kalira's ragged breathing from the floor, but he could see the threat still looming over them. The assassin was recovering, preparing for another strike, and Asher knew they didn't have much time. Kalira's voice, weak but filled with determination, cut through the chaos. "They've found us, haven't they?" Her words were not a question, but a statement, one born of the understanding she had long since come to. Asher turned to her, seeing the glimmer of pain in her amber eyes, but also a quiet understanding of the situation. She had been prepared for this, prepared for the day when she would have to fight for her life once again. Asher nodded grimly, his face a mask of determination. "Yes," he said through clenched teeth. "This isn't just a political game anymore. We're targets." His words hung in the air, settling like an uncomfortable truth between them. The station was no longer a safe haven. The diplomatic mission, the quiet escape, those things were no longer part of the equation. This was real. The threat was here. They were being hunted, and they were no longer in control of the situation. Kalira, despite the blood seeping from her shoulder, lifted herself from the floor with a surprising amount of strength. She gritted her teeth, her amber eyes hardening with the resolve that Asher had come to expect from her. She was no longer the regal diplomat who had walked into his clinic. She was the ruler of a fallen dynasty, and she was ready to fight. "We need to leave, now," Kalira said, her voice steady despite the pain. She pushed herself to her feet, ignoring the searing pain in her shoulder. Asher could see the calculation in her eyes, the determination to survive, to protect what was hers. The room was now filled with the harsh sound of movement, footsteps on metal, the hum of weapons charging, the labored breathing of the injured. The first assassin, now incapacitated, lay in a heap on the floor, but the remaining threat was still alive and moving with deadly purpose. Kalira, despite the wound, stood tall beside Asher, ready to face whatever came next. The tension was palpable, the air heavy with the sound of impending violence. Asher's mind raced, but there was no time to plan. His every instinct told him to protect Kalira, to get her out of the clinic and into safety, but he knew it wasn't just about escaping anymore. This was a fight for survival. The assassin's weapon hummed ominously, and Asher's hand instinctively went to the nearest medical instrument, anything he could use to defend himself and Kalira. It wasn't much, but it was enough to buy them a few precious moments. The metallic corridors of Nexus 7 were more than just a backdrop to their escape. They had become a prison, each turn and junction a reminder of the danger closing in on them. The station, once a mere waypoint in the vast emptiness of space, had now become the setting for a deadly game. Asher's mind raced, his pulse quickening with each step. His boots echoed off the cold, hard surfaces of the hallway as he moved swiftly, his arms cradling NYX with the care of someone handling something both fragile and dangerous. The dim lights above flickered intermittently, casting long, distorted shadows across the walls. The smell of old air and oil filled the passages, a scent that had once been familiar to Asher but now felt oppressive, suffocating. The station's normally calm and mechanical hum had turned into a low, constant thrum of alarm, the warning signs of something much larger than the small, isolated world they had inhabited just hours before. In his arms, NYX remained still, though Asher could feel the creature's pulse beneath its fur, strong but labored. NYX's eyes flickered occasionally, the amber depths filled with an unspoken understanding this was not just an escape. It was something more. Asher could sense the creature's silent awareness of the gravity of the situation, its bond with Kalira stronger than any physical injury. They were not merely running, they were being hunted, and the stakes had never been higher. Kalira moved beside him, her posture rigid despite the grim situation. The Baroness's movements were purposeful, but there was a tense energy around her, a sharpness that Asher couldn't ignore. Her amber eyes were fixed ahead, and Asher could feel the intensity of her determination like a palpable force. She was not the same woman who had entered his clinic earlier. This was a ruler, a leader, someone whose purpose extended beyond mere survival. She was moving towards something greater than herself, and Asher knew that the burden she carried was not one she would easily cast aside. The hallway stretched out before them, a long, uninviting corridor of steel. The walls were cold, featureless, and they seemed to close in around them with every step. The overhead lights flickered, casting an unsettling glow that did little to dispel the growing sense of dread. The once empty corridors were now filled with distant sounds, the clatter of boots on metal floors, the low hum of alarmed communications, and the unmistakable sound of approaching footsteps. Asher didn't have to look behind him to know they were being followed. The assassins had already breached the clinic. There was no time left. But there was one goal now: the hangar. Their only chance to escape. The station's hangar, tucked away in one of the station's more isolated sectors, was small, far too small for the grand escape that Asher had imagined. It was an old, utilitarian space, cluttered with the remnants of old projects and unused supplies. The shuttle they had taken was nothing special: small, compact, with barely enough room for all three of them. But it was functional, well equipped for emergency medical evacuations. It was the only chance they had left. Asher's breath quickened as they neared the hangar. The door slid open with a quiet hiss, revealing the cramped interior of the medical shuttle. The shuttle was simple but efficient, its design intended for rapid deployment rather than comfort. The interior was a bare, utilitarian space: metal benches bolted to the floor, storage compartments lined along the walls, and medical supplies carefully stowed away for emergency use. The faint hum of the shuttle's power systems was the only sound, but it was the sound of hope, a promise of escape, of survival. Asher gently placed NYX onto one of the benches, the creature's breathing still steady but slow. The shuttle's medical systems automatically adjusted, sensors running diagnostics on the creature's vitals as soon as it was settled into place. The small vessel hummed with energy, as though it recognized the urgency of the moment. Kalira stepped in next, her face set in a determined mask. She moved with the confidence of someone who had faced far worse than this and come out victorious. Her eyes were sharp, scanning the shuttle's systems with a practiced gaze. She was already thinking ahead, already planning their next move. Asher moved to the control panel, his fingers working quickly to initiate the shuttle's systems. The hatch closed with a soft click behind them, sealing them inside the small vessel, cutting them off from the outside world. The low, mechanical hum of the shuttle filled the space, and for the first time in what felt like hours, Asher allowed himself to take a breath. Asher turned to Kalira, his face etched with exhaustion and concern. He had done what he could for NYX, but they still weren't out of danger. The station was crawling with enemies, and he knew they would stop at nothing to capture or eliminate Kalira. "We're getting out of here. No one's going to hurt you, Kalira," Asher said, his voice low but filled with determination. He could feel the weight of his promise, the responsibility that had been thrust upon him in the blink of an eye. He wasn't sure he could protect them, but he would try. He had no choice. Kalira turned to him, her amber eyes narrowing slightly, a flicker of something deeper passing across her face. The fierce determination in her gaze was unwavering, but there was something else there, a resolve that transcended the current crisis. "I'm not just running from them." Kalira's voice was steady, carrying the weight of her words. Her eyes locked onto his, and for a moment, Asher saw not just a ruler or a leader, but a woman who had lived through loss, who had seen the destruction of her people and the fall of her dynasty. I'm returning to my people. They need me, Asher. Her words hit him with the force of a revelation. She wasn't just trying to survive, she was reclaiming what was hers. Her mission, her destiny, was far larger than escaping the station. She had a people to lead, a war to fight. Kalira's resolve had never been more evident than it was in that moment. Asher could feel the weight of her words pressing down on him, and he nodded grimly. This wasn't just an escape, it was the beginning of something much bigger. Kalira was not running from responsibility, she was accepting it. And now, so was he. He had become entangled in something far beyond his understanding, and there was no turning back. The shuttle's engines roared to life, and Asher felt the brief lurch of acceleration as they lifted off. The small craft was surprisingly nimble, cutting through the narrow corridors of the station with ease. They passed through the hangar's narrow exit, the view of the vast, empty space of the station's exterior stretching out before them. The cold vacuum of space was a stark contrast to the chaos they had just left behind. Asher glanced back at Kalira, her gaze still focused, her jaw clenched with the weight of her responsibility. She wasn't just looking for safety, she was looking for a way to reclaim her birthright, to return to the people who had been left behind in the wake of the political storm that had consumed her family. Asher's hand tightened on the controls, his eyes scanning the distant stars ahead. They were still a long way from New Harmony, still a long way from safety. The journey was fraught with danger, and he knew that the enemy would follow them, no matter where they went. But for now, they had made it out of Nexus 7. For now, they had a chance. Kalira leaned back in her seat, her eyes briefly closing as she took in a slow, steady breath. She didn't allow herself to show weakness, but Asher could see it, the weight of the journey ahead, the burden of leadership that she carried. She wasn't just a ruler, she was a woman who had lost everything and was now fighting to rebuild it all. Asher turned back to NYX, watching as the creature's breathing began to stabilize. Despite its injuries, there was a quiet strength about it. It was a reminder to him that, no matter how small or fragile they seemed, they were all part of something much larger, a force that could change the course of the galaxy. Kalira's voice broke the silence, steady and clear. "We'll make it, Asher. Together." Her words were more than just a statement, they were a promise. Asher felt the weight of her vow sink into him, felt the pull of something larger than himself drawing him forward. Kalira wasn't just taking back her throne, she was reclaiming the future of her people, and Asher had become a part of that future. Asher met her gaze, the unspoken understanding between them growing stronger. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The journey ahead was uncertain, filled with danger, but for the first time, Asher felt a sense of purpose. He wasn't just running from the past, he was walking into the future, alongside Kalira, with NYX at their side. Nestled in a distant corner of the galaxy, hidden far away from the prying eyes of those who might seek them, New Harmony was an unremarkable settlement by most standards. But for Asher, Kalira, and NYX, it was everything they had left, a sanctuary carved out of the remnants of chaos and strife. The settlement was small, its infrastructure simple, with structures built from repurposed materials, giving it an almost makeshift feel. Yet, there was an undeniable peace here, a peace that had been hard-earned and fought for. The air was crisp and fresh, a stark contrast to the artificial, recycled air of the stations and ships they had fled from. The buildings, though modest and compact, exuded a quiet strength. They were crafted to endure, shaped by necessity rather than design. The settlement was situated in a valley surrounded by rolling hills, the edges of which were dotted with patches of greenery that seemed to thrive despite the harsh conditions that most planets had to offer. Small, crystalline streams snaked through the land, the sound of running water adding a melodic hum to the otherwise serene environment. Above them, the sky stretched endlessly, the stars seeming brighter here, as if offering hope in the darkness. Asher stepped into the center of the settlement, taking in the surroundings with a deep, almost instinctual sigh of relief. His boots crunched softly against the dirt path, the scent of earth mingling with the faint smell of burning wood from the settlement's simple fires. It was a far cry from the cold, industrial feel of Nexus 7 or the danger that had stalked them through every corner of the galaxy. Here, in this small haven, they were hidden from the chaos, but only for as long as it would take for their enemies to track them down. Kalira, walking beside him, looked out at the horizon with a distant expression. Her posture was still regal, though more relaxed than Asher had seen it in some time. Her usual layers of diplomatic armor were gone, no longer were there the formal robes and dignified masks of her past life. She was dressed simply, in practical clothes made for survival rather than appearance. The heavy weight of leadership that had once marked her as a ruler of an empire now seemed distant, and in its place, there was a quiet, almost serene acceptance of the present moment. NYX, now fully recovered, prowled the perimeter of their refuge with a quiet, predatory grace. The creature moved with fluid confidence, its sleek form darting in and out of the shadows between the buildings. Its amber eyes gleamed with a sharpness that never seemed to dull, even as its body had healed. The creature's heightened senses were ever on alert, and it seemed to be aware of every movement, every shift in the wind, every faint sound that could indicate a threat. NYX was no longer the injured, vulnerable creature they had rescued. It was a predator in its prime, a silent guardian watching over them, ever ready to strike if danger approached. The bond between NYX and Kalira remained as strong as ever. Though they had traveled far from the life they had known, NYX's presence was a constant reminder of what had been lost and of the path they had yet to walk. The creature was more than a companion, it was a symbol of Kalira's strength, a living, breathing extension of herself. Its loyalty to her was unwavering, and its protective instincts now extended to Asher as well. Asher couldn't help but admire the creature's silent, graceful movements. In many ways, NYX was a perfect reflection of the resilience that Kalira herself embodied. Both had survived things that most people would never understand. Both had witnessed the fall of their world and were now, by necessity, rebuilding it piece by piece. Kalira stopped at the edge of the settlement, gazing out at the valley before them. The sun had begun to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows over the land. The air was cooling, but there was something about the stillness of the place that gave Kalira a sense of calm, something she hadn't felt in a long time. She let out a quiet sigh, and Asher could see the weight of her thoughts settling in her expression. "I may never be able to go back to the life I knew," she said softly, her voice barely rising above a whisper. There was a vulnerability in her tone that Asher had not heard before, a hint of sadness, but also acceptance. "But I've found something worth fighting for." Her words hung in the air, and Asher's heart caught in his chest. He could see the truth in her eyes, the truth that, despite everything she had lost, Kalira had found something here. This settlement, this simple life, was not what she had been raised to rule, but it was something more. It was a chance. A chance to rebuild, to start anew, and to find purpose once again. Asher felt a deep respect for her, not just for the woman she had been, but for the person she was becoming. Asher watched Kalira, his gaze lingering on her for a moment longer than usual. There was a raw strength in her, one that had not been evident at first, buried beneath the weight of her royal responsibilities. Now, though, it was impossible to ignore. Kalira had survived. She had lost everything: her family, her home, her position, but she had found a new purpose. The fire within her had not been extinguished, it had only been refocused, redirected toward something new. Asher's admiration for her flickered in his eyes, though he said nothing for a moment. He had come to understand that Kalira was not just a ruler. She was a survivor. She had endured the fall of an entire world and had faced death, loss, and betrayal at every turn. Yet here she stood, determined, unyielding, ready to fight for her people. She wasn't running from her past, she was forging a future. "You're not just a ruler, Kalira," Asher said quietly, his voice filled with a deep respect that he hadn't fully realized until that moment. "You're a survivor. And so are we." His words, though simple, seemed to resonate with Kalira. She turned to him, her expression softening slightly, though the resolve in her eyes remained unshaken. Asher realized that, in a way, they had both become survivors. They had both lost something precious, something irreplaceable, and yet, here they were still alive, still moving forward. The quiet moments in the settlement of New Harmony were fleeting, but they were enough for Asher and Kalira to regroup, to breathe, and to take stock of the situation. The world they had once known was gone, but in this hidden refuge, they had found something new, a chance to build a future that was theirs, free from the political games that had once dominated their lives. Asher didn't know what the future held. He didn't know if they would ever find peace, or if they would always be hunted by those who sought to control Kalira's destiny. But in that moment, standing beside Kalira with NYX patrolling the perimeter, Asher knew one thing for certain: they were no longer alone. They had found each other, and that bond, that alliance, was something worth fighting for. Kalira, despite everything, had found a place where she could rebuild, a place where she could lead her people once again, not from a throne of gold, but from the dirt of the ground beneath her feet. She had found purpose again, and Asher had become an unexpected part of that purpose. Together, they would face whatever challenges the universe threw their way. Together, they would fight for the future they had yet to shape, the future they had yet to reclaim. The horizon stretched before them, wide and uncertain, but there was a glimmer of hope on the distant edge. The future was theirs to create. The Theian capital, once a glittering beacon of power and wealth, now lay under the shroud of war. The grand city, with its towering spires and majestic streets, stood battered and bruised, the scars of battle etched across every corner. Smoke rose from the buildings, dark and thick, as the remnants of the rebellion raged across the city. Streets once paved with gold were now stained with the dust of revolution, the cries of the oppressed ringing in the air, echoing through the shattered silence that had enveloped the city. The city, though beautiful in its ancient grandeur, had become a battleground every step, every corner, laden with tension and desperation. The palace, a towering fortress of stone and steel, loomed over the city like an unyielding symbol of power. Its once polished surfaces were marred with the marks of war, the mighty structure now both a prison and a sanctuary for those within. Kalira, standing at the edge of the grand palace's marble steps, felt the weight of her destiny pressing upon her. This was at the moment that would define her future and that of her people. The throne that had been stolen from her, the seat of power that she had been born to claim, was now within reach. Yet, it had not been reclaimed through diplomacy or inheritance, it had been earned through bloodshed, betrayal, and the will to rise from the ashes of a broken dynasty. Kalira had led the rebellion not just for her birthright, but for the very soul of her people. She had fought against a corrupt regime that had ruled with fear, oppression, and cruelty. Her people were starving not just for food, but for hope, for a leader who would see them not as subjects, but as equals. Now, the time had come to face her cousin, Ravik, the man who had usurped her throne, the man who had torn the Theian dynasty apart. The Grand Council chamber was silent, heavy with the weight of history. The once pristine floor of marble now showed signs of battle. The sharp lines of blood streaked across the tiles, and the high windows, once grand and clear, were shattered. Through the broken glass, the distant rumble of the city's chaos reached them, a reminder of the rebellion's fury. Kalira stood at the center of the chamber, her posture regal, but her eyes burning with a quiet fire. She was no longer the princess of a fallen dynasty, she was the leader of a rebellion, a warrior who had come to reclaim her throne, not with fear, but with the strength of her conviction. Her robes, once pristine, were now stained by battle, torn at the edges, but they only added to her power. She was not here to show weakness, nor to cower before her cousin. She had come to take what was rightfully hers. Ravik, standing on the other side of the chamber, sneered at her. His appearance had not changed, still clad in the ceremonial armor of a ruler, his stance confident and imposing. But his eyes, those sharp, calculating eyes, were clouded with fear. For all his bluster, Ravik knew the truth: he was losing control. His reign, built on deceit and manipulation, had crumbled. The rebellion, Kalira's forces, had breached the palace. Kalira's loyalists now surrounded him, their weapons drawn, their eyes hard with resolve. Kalira stepped forward, her voice cutting through the heavy silence of the room. It was a challenge, fierce and unwavering. "This is my throne. My people are starving for change. You will not rule with fear." Her voice rang out, sharp and commanding, reverberating off the walls of the chamber. Kalira had never sounded more powerful. Her words weren't just a declaration of intent, they were a promise to her people. This was no longer just a fight for the throne. It was a fight for the soul of her people, for the future of the Theian dynasty. Ravik's sneer faltered for a moment. For the first time, Asher saw a flicker of doubt in his eyes, something that had been missing in their previous encounters. Kalira's words had cut deeper than any weapon. Ravik had ruled with fear, had thrived on intimidation, but he had underestimated Kalira's strength. She wasn't just a ruler, she was a symbol of the future, a force that could not be stopped. As Kalira's words hung in the air, Ravik's expression shifted from arrogant defiance to something darker, something almost primal. With a low growl, he pulled a weapon from his side, a jagged, ceremonial blade that gleamed in the dim light of the chamber. It was a weapon of symbols, meant to intimidate, meant to project power. But Kalira didn't flinch. Her eyes remained steady, her hand resting on the hilt of her own blade. The tension in the room was palpable. The battle was no longer just physical. It was mental, emotional. This was a contest of wills, a contest for the heart of the Theian people. The two cousins faced each other, Kalira, the rightful heir, and Ravik, the usurper. But the difference between them was clear. Ravik's reign was built on fear, while Kalira's strength came from unity and resolve. Without warning, Ravik lunged, the blade cutting through the air with a shrill whistle. Kalira blocked it effortlessly, her movements graceful and precise. The clang of steel against steel echoed through the chamber, and for a moment, it was as if time itself had slowed. Each strike, each parry, each move was calculated. This was no ordinary fight. This was a battle for the future, for the Theian people who had watched in silence as their kingdom crumbled under Ravik's rule. Kalira's strikes were swift, fluid, and filled with purpose. She wasn't just fighting to win, she was fighting for everything she had lost. For the throne that had been stolen from her, for the people who had been oppressed, for the world she was determined to rebuild. Ravik's strikes were wild, desperate, as though he could no longer maintain control. His sneer had faded entirely, replaced with a grimace of frustration. Kalira was not the young, naive princess he had once dominated. She had become something more, something far greater than he had ever anticipated. Asher stood by Kalira, his eyes never leaving the scene unfolding before him. He was not a warrior, not a fighter, but he was bound to this moment in a way that he hadn't been before. He had come to this place not as an outsider, not as a mere observer, but as a participant in the fight for the future of the Theian people. He had sworn to protect Kalira, and now, that promise had become a shared responsibility. The weight of their bond, the connection they had formed, pulsed between them as they faced Ravik. Asher didn't need to look at Kalira to know what she was thinking. Her focus was absolute, her every movement a reflection of the resolve that had carried her this far. She was not just fighting for herself, she was fighting for all those who had suffered under Ravik's rule. As the battle raged on, Asher could feel the tension rising, the weight of the rebellion pressing down on the very air around them. The sound of their struggle, the clash of steel, the heavy breaths, the grunts of effort was drowned out by the realization that this was more than a physical fight. It was a battle for identity, for the future. Kalira's words echoed in Asher's mind, "We will unite the people, not divide them." The promise was clear, and as Kalira's blade finally connected with Ravik's, sending him sprawling to the floor, it was a victory not just for her, but for the entire Theian people. Ravik fell to the ground, his blade clattering away from his grasp. His once dominant presence was gone, replaced with the defeated form of a ruler who had been undone by his own arrogance. Kalira stood over him, her breath heavy, her blade still steady in her hand. There was no triumph in her expression, no sense of gloating. She had won, yes, but the cost had been high. The rebellion had torn the capital apart, and many had died in the process. Kalira's eyes met Ravik's, but there was no hatred in them, only a quiet, resolute understanding that the past was now behind them. "This is my throne," Kalira said, her voice calm but unyielding. "My people are starving for change. You will not rule with fear." As Ravik lay on the cold stone floor, his eyes filled with bitterness, Kalira's words seemed to settle over him like a final judgment. The battle had been fought, the rebellion had succeeded, and the Theian dynasty would rise once more, not on the backs of fear and violence, but on the foundation of unity and hope. The battle had been long and brutal, a tempest of fire and steel that had torn through the very heart of the Theian capital. The once pristine streets were now scarred by the violence of war, the buildings marked by the destruction of an empire that had fallen under the weight of its own corruption. But now, as the dust began to settle, a new story was beginning to take shape, one not written in blood, but in hope. The capital, once a place of opulence and power, stood silent. The grand palace, a towering structure of ancient stone and metal, loomed above the city, its once glimmering spires now dulled by the ravages of the conflict. The walls, though damaged, still held the memories of a time when they had stood as a symbol of authority, a reminder of the Theian dynasty's former glory. Now, they were the backdrop for something new, something that could never be undone. Kalira, the once exiled heir to the throne, stood at the steps of the palace, her posture as regal as ever, but with a quiet strength that radiated from her every movement. The chaos of the past days had not broken her. Instead, it had forged something more, an understanding that her role as ruler would not be defined by the sword, but by the unity she would bring to her people. She had not taken the throne through violence alone. She had reclaimed it with the strength of her conviction, with the trust of those who had followed her into this moment. The wind whispered through the ruined streets, carrying the faintest scent of fresh earth and a promise of renewal. Kalira's once pristine robe, now torn and worn from battle, fluttered behind her like the banner of a new beginning. She had fought to take back her birthright, not to rule through fear, but to bring the Theian people together, to rebuild what had been destroyed. She was not just reclaiming a throne, she was reclaiming hope. Beside her, Asher stood, his gaze fixed on the horizon. The weight of the battle was still fresh in his mind, the echoes of the clash between rival factions reverberating through his thoughts. But there was a quiet peace in the air now, a moment of stillness that was impossible to ignore. He had never imagined that his journey would lead him here, standing beside Kalira, witnessing the birth of a new era for the Theian people. His heart swelled with a sense of pride, not just for the victory they had achieved, but for the strength of character that Kalira had shown. She had led them all through the darkest of times, and now, standing on the steps of her palace, she had become more than a ruler. She had become a symbol of rebirth. NYX, still by their side, prowled the steps with an elegant grace. The creature had been at the heart of the battle, protecting Kalira and Asher with a fierceness that only someone bound to their cause could possess. Its fur gleamed in the sunlight as it surveyed the scene, its amber eyes reflecting the quiet pride of a guardian who had seen its duty fulfilled. Kalira's voice rang out, clear and unwavering, as she addressed the gathering crowd that had assembled in the ruins of the square below. Her words were not just for the people, but for herself, for everything she had fought for, and everything she was determined to build. There was no hesitation in her tone, no wavering in the strength of her resolve. "I will rule, but not with fear," Kalira declared, her voice carrying over the quiet expanse of the capital. "We will unite the people, not divide them. The scars of the past will not define us. We will rebuild together, and we will forge a future where every voice matters." Her eyes swept across the crowd, taking in the faces of those who had once been her enemies, but who now stood with her as allies. The look in their eyes was one of recognition, not of power, but of something more profound, a shared understanding that they had all been a part of this moment, this rebirth. Asher's gaze shifted to the people below as well. They stood in silence, absorbing Kalira's words, some with tears in their eyes, others with expressions of hope they hadn't dared to feel for years. The Theian capital, once a place of division and conquest, was now a place of healing and unity. The remnants of war were still present, but they no longer defined the future. Kalira turned to Asher, her expression softening for just a moment as she allowed herself to feel the weight of what had been accomplished. She had reclaimed her birthright, but more than that, she had reclaimed the trust of her people. The battle for her throne had been won, but the true fight had just begun, the fight to rebuild, to unite, and to ensure that the past would never repeat itself. Asher smiled softly, the weariness of the past few days still lingering in his bones, but tempered by the quiet joy of the moment. His eyes wandered over the ruins of the city, but he could see beyond the destruction. He saw the potential for a new beginning, the chance for the Theian people to rise from the ashes and build something stronger, something more resilient than before. For the first time in a long while, Asher felt that he was exactly where he needed to be. He had never asked for this role, this involvement in Kalira's fight, but it had found him nonetheless. And now, as he stood beside her, having witnessed her strength, her conviction, and her willingness to fight for what she believed in, he realized that he was no longer just a healer, a bystander. He was part of something larger. The battle had been won, yes, but the true work lay ahead. And he was ready to face it, alongside Kalira and NYX. Kalira was not just a ruler, she was a survivor. She had endured the collapse of her dynasty, the betrayal of those closest to her, and the loss of everything she had once known. But in the rubble of her past, she had found something worth fighting for, a future. And that future was now within reach. As the sunlight began to dip below the horizon, casting a golden hue over the capital, Kalira's eyes lingered on the city below. The streets were quieter now, the people slowly beginning to rebuild. The sound of their voices, once muffled by fear and uncertainty, now filled the air with a new kind of energy, an energy of possibility. Asher looked out at the horizon too, his gaze following Kalira's. The stars above seemed brighter than ever, as if offering silent reassurance that the path ahead was uncertain, but not without hope. This was not the end. This was just the beginning. Kalira had reclaimed her throne, not through fear, but through unity. She had found a way to bring her people together, to heal the wounds of the past, and to ensure that the future would be one of collaboration and strength, not division. She was no longer just a monarch, she was a symbol of resilience, of the will to rise above the ashes of a broken world and create something new. Asher, standing beside her, realized that this new era was not just Kalira's, it was theirs. It was the beginning of a shared journey, one that would see the Theian people rise once more, stronger, and more united than ever before. And whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The future was unwritten, but for the first time in a long time, there was hope that the scars of the past could be healed, and that a new era could rise from the ruins of the old.